Hey, Scott from Aristocop.com here.
And Seth from SethMarket.com.
Together, along with you, and this kind of feels like deja vu. We are Mark Woodman's Breakfast Club. Welcome, maybe once again, or welcome for the first time. And Morning Boy, why does this feel like deja vu to me all of a sudden?
We just recorded this episode, and no, we didn't. So we're going to try again this time and actually record it.
This does remind me of advice we gave years ago to new YTPC people that maybe multiple cameras is a good idea.
Set up. So one of the one disadvantage of using your cell phone for filming, if you are using it in a wide angle, and if you're trying to get higher quality and you're using the rear-facing camera, the big camera, and not the front-facing camera, which has a lower resolution, then one of the disadvantages is you can't see while recording to confirm if it's recording. And about 10 minutes into us recording this episode, I thought, did I press record? I can't remember. And I thought, I should get up and check. No, I don't want to interrupt because this is really good video. Really good conversation we're having. I had not. So we're going to do this again. So, the end of the last video, a thought hit about the Apollo 11 project being done by Adam Savage. And that's that it's fascinating to see this project that's bringing in these expertise from many different YouTube creators, many of whom would define themselves as a maker, someone who's multi-talented. They're interested in a number of different ways to produce and make things.
And some of these people early on were almost apologetic, and really some of the comments were unfair as these guys were trying some new skill. Maybe they're a woodworker, but they're trying metal, or they're working with leather, or they're pouring plastic resin. And like I say, some of the comments were unfair because they were coming from people that know that craft very well, and it's like, who are you to be making videos on this when you know nothing about it? And it's a shame because many of these guys went from where they were learning something for the first time, and then they started incorporating that in with their previous knowledge, and now they're doing really, really cool things.
Yeah.
And an example of a maker, a lot of, as a woodworker, and I categorize myself more as a woodworker than a maker because while I'm interested in things like blacksmithing, I don't do blacksmithing. If I did, or if I was doing welding, then maybe I would think of myself more as a maker. We were talking about 3D printers. One of the first things that Seth needed, because he was going to be using these printers in the house, was some way to contain the smell, because you're melting plastic, right? And I think, was it on Reddit that you saw it, or where did you see the idea?
Yeah, I think it was on Reddit. It was on Reddit or Pinterest. It was all over the place. For my particular model of 3D printer, there's a very easy enclosure that can be built, and it's built using pretty easy to get and cheap parts. It's called the LAC 3D printer enclosure hack, or you find it. LAC is the name of the table. It's a bedside table that's sold for less than $20 by IKEA. There's an IKEA about an hour from us, and so we went down there and picked up a few of these tables. And with the table becomes the frame of the enclosure, the lid, and you can actually stack multiples. And so you can have a space underneath, your 3D printer sitting on top of the first table, the second table sitting on top, and with a few 3D printed brackets.
And hinges.
3D printed hinges, you can create a box using plastic or glass to actually enclose the whole thing. And there are advantages to having an enclosure. It allows you to print some plastics that require a higher temperature that my 3D printer in particular can't meet consistently without having some sort of box to keep the heat in. And so there are people that just take a cardboard box, plop it on top once the 3D printer is going, and that's done.
And a woodworker like me, I'd want to build a cabinet, and it would take me way too long because I'd want to make it well. Where a maker who isn't interested in learning woodworking to be a woodworker, they're interested in completing their task, would maybe learn enough of how to use a chop saw safely, how to use a pocket hole jig safely, boom, they know enough about woodworking to maybe spark their interest in future projects, but for now, they learn enough to get the job done.
Yeah, and it's a combination of a multidiscipline approach, all working together to create a solution for this. And so, in talking about this project and talking about this, it sparked a memory of some things I've been researching recently. In particular, I've been looking into the difference between and advantages to looking at specialists versus generalists. Now, a specialist is somebody in an organization, a company, in a team who has a laser focus on one topic, one subject matter. So, it's safe to say that many surgeons are specialists, right? Their focus might be on kidneys or internal pieces or knee. You want a knee surgeon who has experience and is an expert on knee surgery to do your knee surgery. Right? That's an example of a good specialist. But you might not want the maintenance guy at a McDonald's to be a plumbing specialist, because there are going to be other maintenance problems that come up that are not plumbing related. And so when you have a specialist in a position where you might have other problems come up, their problem solving framework, mental worldview is limited to their area of expertise. So they're going to want to solve the problem like a plumber would, and sometimes that's advantageous, right? But you really want that person on a part of a larger team, because that's not always the best solution to the problem. The famous saying, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The only way you see to solve the problem is through that lens. And I was listening to a podcast, listened to the Building a Story Brand podcast, which is great in leadership and business. And the guest they had on has written a book where they talk about the advantages. It's actually advantageous to use generalists, people that have interdisciplinary skills for problem solving. So they talked about the advantage of having people who have worked jobs maybe in different industries as part of your team, because you learn things as you're exposed to other pieces of information. And the example he gave was this. Said that there's a thought experiment they would ask doctors. Say you're a surgeon, you're a doctor, and there's an aggressive tumor that your patient is dealing with, and you can't operate on this patient. It's too sensitive to operate. The only solution available to you is to hit it with a particular type of ray. The ray, when full power, is powerful enough to kill the tumor. But unfortunately, it also kills any other internal organs that are in the path of the tumor because of just the high power, and so it would kill the patient.
So you blast a hole this big through somebody's spleen
all the way through
to get to
the tumor.
The tumor.
That's right. And if you lower the power to a point where it won't hurt the spleen, it's not powerful enough to kill the tumor. What do? Surgeons and doctors have a hard time thinking of a solution. In fact, many people have a hard time thinking of a solution on the spot, especially when given a time limit. This is like an SAT kind of question, right? Now, to show how a generalist might think differently about the solution is on the podcast, he tells a second story. See if maybe this helps you find a solution to your first problem. There was a military general who was tasked with taking over a fortress. The general was confident that if he could attack the fortress with his entire force, his entire military force, that they could win. Unfortunately, there was not a single road to the fortress, but in fact the fortress sat in the middle of a series of roads that went outward like a spoke.
So no one road that could handle
the entire military force.
Okay.
That's right. So instead it was sitting in the center of a spoke with multiple smaller roads that left out. And so the general, to attack the fortress with his entire force, had his team broken up into smaller regiments and had each of them coordinate an attack along each of the different spoke paths so that they all, with a smaller military force, hit the target at the same time, coordinated with the full force of the military.
So you're not destroying the entire spleen now. You're going to break this up into different parts.
The question is, with this extra information, which has nothing to do, this is not information that a doctor would have, but somebody who's studied military history might have. Can you now solve the first problem? And of course, the solution is obvious.
Yeah.
You split up the rays, you attack it from multiple angles, so it's not.
You're damaging a lot of things, but you're not destroying everything.
The only thing that's destroyed is the thing where all of the points combine. And so he was talking about how this type of being exposed to other ideas that are outside the scope of your focus is actually very beneficial to helping solve problems, because our brains are very, very good, naturally good at saying, this is like something else I know of. And when our brains make that connection, it's easy for us to find solutions to problems that we might otherwise have a tunnel vision on. And so we've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm doing recruiting for my company, and we're a small company. We all have to wear many hats, which is just another way of saying we all have to be generalists, and have found in the past that people that are specialists will be the first to say it's not my problem or that's not my responsibility. And when they do that, not only does it hurt the organization, but it hurts their ability to grow in the organization, because when you have that person and then you have the person next to them say, that's not my responsibility, but I'll try, I'll figure it out, then not only does that person get exposure to more ideas, that person is perceived as being more valuable to the company, and their ability to solve future problems has now increased. So they're making themselves more valuable to the company now and also in the future as we face new challenges.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting, and it has challenged me to personally, and then also to encourage members of my team to start seeking time spent thinking about things that are outside of work, outside of the scope of what they do, exposing themselves to more things than just the Real Housewives or some of these things that maybe could relate to what we do, even though they may not on the surface seem like they do.
So one of my favorite woodworking books, I got it probably 25, 30 years ago, was written by a company in, I want to say they were in Switzerland, a company called Inca. Inca is a European power tool manufacturer, and their approach to power tools is completely unique in Europe because they work primarily with sheet goods, not solid wood. And so you might even call them engineered woods.
Okay.
As the wood comes in, it's all the same size. You can buy a 4x8 sheet of plywood or particle board, where if you're working with real wood, you're not going to get that, right? But this book was written by an engineer who had been a machinist. And he was applying the thinking and the tools and the approach to woodworking that he would normally apply to metalworking. And I remember one of the ones that really taught me a lesson that jumped out to me. It used to be if I was going to lay out a piece of wood to cut it up on the table saw, I would, if I'm measuring 20 pieces, I would lay it all out and I'd mark a 6-inch piece. And then I'd have to remember to also account for the saw's kerf, about 1/8 of an inch.
Yeah.
I have to mark that, and then I'd measure another 6 inches and mark that, and then another 1/8 of an inch and mark that, and so on. And I'd get really frustrated on the saw because, my vision from measuring the original part and then transferring over to the next one, and then adding that 1/8 of an inch, the width of my pencil would change as I'm marking. Like I said, just my vision and the tape measure.
Just imagine you going, okay, it's this long. Here we go.
Yeah. And
We've all
it was very frustrating. Well, what this guy introduced me to is something called 1, 2, 3 blocks. And machinists will buy these. They come in a little wooden box, and you open it up, and there are these 2 cast iron blocks. And one thing, if you've ever seen them or never seen them, it's a cast iron block that is 1 inch thick, 2 inches wide, 3 inches long, and then it's got through holes drilled all the way through. So it's like Swiss cheese, only the holes are exactly the same diameter. And the holes are there just to lighten these cast iron blocks, but they're precision ground. and they're always sold in pairs. And the way you'd use these is, let's say you're setting up some clamps or jigs or fixtures on a milling machine. You would take your 3-inch block and lay it into the tool this direction, butt it up against the fence, and then lock your clamp down. Well, your clamp is now 3 inches away. Well, what if you want 4 inches? Well, you take one of your other blocks, you lay it this direction, you put your other one this direction. Now you have 4 inches, and now you have 4 inches this direction, but you can have 5 inches, you can have 6 inches. Any measure you want can be built up between 1 inch and 6 inch. And then in combination with other similar tools, you can lay out your equipment and be good to go. What this book advised is either measure the part that you're going to make and then set up a stop block, or make that first piece precise, set up your stop block, and then you're no longer measuring the pieces, you're measuring your tool.
Right.
And then that way, every single cut, if your tool is set up precisely, will be exactly the same. I was watching a YouTuber who's in the process of building a table saw, and he's got actually a couple channels. One is a channel where he does well-edited videos showing the complete process of him building the tool. The other channel is more of a vlog. It's him solving problems and thinking through things and talking about, hey, I've been getting this feedback, and why don't I build the rip fence this way? Well, I've done them that way, and it's got these problems. And I love that. And he's talked about a number of the challenges that you can get yourself so bogged down in perfection. If your rip fence is set to 7 inches and you make a cut, and then it turns out that actually at the 7-inch point, it locks down precisely every single time, but it locks down a hair longer than 7 inches. So what? As long as every piece that should be 7 inches is a hair longer than 7 inches, when you're building something of those 7-inch pieces, they're all exactly the same.
Yeah.
And again, that thinking coming from that book, if I can find a link to it, I'll post it, really changed the way I work in my shop. And it freed me from some of my challenges I have from dyslexia, and also challenges we all have as we look at a tape measure in the light of a shop. Anyway.
I think we talked about this a couple months ago, but my brother-in-law Isaac was doing construction work and had a similar aha moment. He was building fences, and I think he was taking he's probably taking a tape measure, a rope, and every time to measure the distance between the posts was spiking it down, laying it out, and measuring, and his mentor said, "What are you doing? Why are you're wasting so much time?" And so I think their solution is they went and got some thin, like 1/2-inch PVC pipe, cut it to 7 feet. He said, here's your distance. And then they went out with spray paint and just laid it down, spray, pull it over, spray, pull it over. And he said it cut down time measuring out his posts by a third. And if you get to the end and it's you don't have a full one, then you kind of go back and just kind of spread that out over the last 3 posts, and no one notices.
In custom cabinet making and also in architectural millwork, there's nothing more frustrating to being back at your shop building something and going, dang it, we forgot to measure, there's an outlet on the wall, or there's a switch, or where is the window exactly? And we just didn't get that notation. And so a lot of shops will use something that they call story sticks, and they'll take basically a furring strip, and they'll go into the kitchen and they'll make a mark on it to let them know what corner of the room they stick that story stick against. And then everywhere there's a significant thing they want to measure, they just make a mark. Here's where the outlet begins and ends. Here's where the window begins and ends. And they're moving the story stick up and down. In some cases, they use them in pairs. You have a vertical and you have a horizontal. And so you move it up and you make a mark on your vertical where that one is, where the height of it is, and then you make the marks on your story stick. You take those sticks back to your shop and you want to know where the outlet is,
everything.
You can measure right off your story sticks.
Right. That's amazing.
Yep. And, again, those are things that can cross over. So I love this idea of the maker and of the generalist. Some would say the master of none. I'm sorry, some of these guys can do things that some specialists cannot accomplish because they just bump up against the end of their knowledge and they got nothing. And
being the generalist gives you more tools in your tool belt to work with, and so you might be a master of none, but if you're a master of problem solving,
your grandfather,
yeah.
Your mom's dad,
Yep.
no one would say he was a master of none. What they would say is he knows everything. And that's because he built homes for fun. He worked at a printing company, but in the evenings, weekends, vacations, he would help friends put additions on their houses. Cool. He built his own home. He helped build his brother-in-law's house. He could build a brick wall, lay a brick wall. He could pour concrete. He could stud a wall. He could roof a house. He could do electrical work. He could do plumbing. He could do anything. And do you think he could do anything when he started? Nope. But he learned. Probably one of the most interesting stories about him that happened very early on was he was drafted into the Army and he was over in Korea. And he was an infantryman because he had those skills. And he was marching to the front when they encountered a row of I forget what ton, like 2.5 ton truck. These big, they were cargo movers, they were people movers, these big trucks. And something had happened to a driver. I don't know if he was killed or injured, but they were down a driver. And the commander of this fleet of trucks stopped his platoon and said, "Does anybody know how to drive a truck?" And he raised his hand. And so he climbs up into this truck as his platoon moves on down the road. And the first thing he does is he starts grinding the gears. And the guy looks at him and says, "You don't know how to drive one of these trucks, do you?" And he says, "This particular truck? No, sir, but I will learn." And he did. And he lived out the rest of his life being way back from the front.
Yeah.
Now, he was a different kind of a target driving a truck full of ammunition, right. But because he was willing to try, he learned a whole new skill and made him more valuable to the war effort, and on from there.
I always tell people, young people, when I talk to them, they're trying to figure out how to get a job, or older people. I've had conversations pretty recently with people who are looking for a career change, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't think I have the experience to do what I want to do." And I think that in many ways, I have found success by selling myself as a generalist, because if you look at my resume, the things on there: I worked at Target, I worked as a substitute teacher, I worked at a summer camp, I have a degree in theology, I worked at a plumbing company. Those things don't logically, those don't lead a specialist to the place I am now. And in every successful role, every kind of step up role I've had, been able to get there by saying, these are the skills that I've learned as a camp counselor that apply to this position. This is I'm really good with people and I've led a team. Sure, it was a team of campers or your counselors, but whatever. I can do this. I can do this. I've got this skill, and showing how these things that are seemingly unrelated, painting the picture, these things that are seemingly unrelated relate to the job at hand. I think that that's in many ways what we're talking about, and I think that's true of most people in most jobs, most careers, if they have the perspective to see how that applies. I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation with people like, I don't have any skill set that would apply to this. What did you do? Well, I spent my whole day, doing graphic design, whatever. What do you mean you don't have a skill set?
Yeah.
Over and over and over again.
I talked to an Uber driver one time who was really down on himself and couldn't find the job, It's like, well, what have you done? And he was telling me about his job working in, I think it was a Lowe's or Home Depot. So what were your responsibilities there? And he's telling me about how, he stocked the shelves and, helped customers when necessary and yada, yada. And I said, so it was part of your job then to pay attention to the needs of customers at the same time while staying focused on the business needs, the details, and to keep the inventory sellable and to make sure that all this, and reframing in his mind his skills and the things that he picked up, and that you can apply those skills to vast jobs. And while saying I was a clerk at Home Depot may not move the needle for somebody because they're not looking for a clerk. Yeah. But what they're looking for are the skill sets that you learn, the teamwork and the drive and the fact that you showed up for work every day. Those are important.
One of the Story Brand videos they do daily was talking about what to do with if you're laid off. And I dovetailed with a conversation I had with somebody who's looking for work. And they said, you need to be prepared with your statement after somebody asks how work is. When you tell them, well, I was laid off. The first thing you'll get is sympathy. And if you follow up, I was laid off and I'm very excited about the opportunity to pursue XYZ, the conversation completely changes. And this person has been looking for work for a couple of months. They left the job because it was a terrible job situation, and they, took it upon themselves to leave. But they were saying, yeah, I went home and everyone's just like blah blah blah, real bummed out. I just kind of don't want to talk to anybody about it. I said, well, did you tell them why you left? Yeah. What you're looking for, that you're excited for the future of finding opportunity? And saying, no, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it kind of is, isn't it? Yeah. Wow.
So, all right, we have gone way over now than we did the first time we filmed this. So,
and this was better than the first one.
I think so too. So thank you guys for sticking around. Hopefully this one recorded. I was half tempted to get up halfway through this and,
I didn't
and triple check. It should have. But if it isn't, you haven't seen this, and we'll record it again because it's a good conversation. Glad we've had it. If it did record, excellent. Thanks for joining us. And we will see you again next week. Same place, same clothes, same Lane Limited 7.
Make it a great week.
See ya.